Hello and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. This is your host, Rachel Jameson. I'm alone today. I was actually supposed to do this Friday and stuff just happened and I couldn't do it. We've been busy working outside. It's finally nice out and we've been busy finishing our other house to sell. So anyways, Harold and I's schedules have not worked out. He's also been busy. So I decided to do this one on my own. In the past, Harold and I have talked about growing vertically many times, just in certain podcasts, but we haven't covered it lengthwise. And there's a possibility that he covered it in a podcast a long time ago. I looked at like grow towers and stuff like that and searched it, and he did do something like that, but it's been quite a while. So I thought I would cover it. It's something that I do a lot. I think he does it a lot too. And if you live in a small, where you don't have a lot of space, it just helps optimize space. So I thought I would talk about it today. So homestead updates. Not a lot happening here. The birds are back. We've had a lot of the migratory birds have started to appear finally up here. We still don't have leaves on our trees, though I did notice that my forsythia has bloomed, which is one of the first ones to bloom. Excuse me. My allergies have been pretty rough because we have been sanding trim boards. Or I have been, and my husband has been doing some drywall patches in a couple of spots. So my allergies are really rough and my eyes itch like crazy. So anyway, let's get into this, growing vertically. What are the reasons that people grow vertically? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the main reasons is space. It saves space. One of the other things is it gives you better airflow. So if you live somewhere like I do, in the winters it's dry here, but in the summers it can be humid. It really helps with some of those moisture diseases. So people grow for better airflow. People also grow for easier harvesting. I'm getting older and I get tired of bending over, and it does help ease harvesting. Some of these vining things like a squash, they go forever and ever and ever, and you're hunting under the leaves trying to find things, and then inevitably you come out one day and there's that one, like say cucumber that you missed, and it's just huge and the seeds are huge and it's not good. So you have to give it to like the chickens or the compost pile. That's another reason. It just makes it super easy to see some of your fruit. And the other reason is pest control. Oh, excuse me. And another reason behind pest control, I wonder, I'm not sure if this works because I don't live somewhere where there's like red ants and stuff like that. I mean, we have red ants, but we don't typically have like the fire ants. If it helps with that, maybe? I don't know because I don't live there, but it's a thought. No soil, no problem. So you can grow vertically. And I see it a lot in like cities and even our little downtown. I mean, we're not a city technically, but our little downtown, not at our new place, but at our old place, the smaller downtown, there was people growing on top of parking lots, or you could even grow in containers, grow vertically in contaminated soil. So you avoid using that soil and you bring in new soil. So there's a lot of options for growing vertically. Now, some of the basic setups for growing vertically are trellises. That's what I use. I use trellises. I use arbors and arches. So I used trellises. My trellises consisted of, we would put a piece of rebar in the ground, and we got a conduit, so metal conduit and metal conduit bender, and we bent a bunch of conduit. And then we used, I used a netting. At the time, I think it was called tomato netting, but I have a link for that in the show notes. It lasts actually several years. So we would slide the conduit over top of the rebar that we had pounded into the ground, and it actually held really well. You would be surprised how well it held, even heavy things like tomatoes and stuff like that. So that is what I used for the most part. I also used long sticks that I had cut, or people use sunflower stalks, but you can use bamboo. So you can use anything like a stick, and we would use that, and we would do like the typical TP method. And I would use that especially for my beans. It worked really well for beans. And but the arbors and arches I used, oftentimes it was like a cattle panel or a hog panel, and you can buy those in different lengths. I think ours were about 10 feet. The only problem with those is they are a little bit hard to transport, but I've seen some pretty ingenious ways of people transporting those in cars and stuff like that. And you basically just fold those over, turn them into like arches, and you can hold them with T-posts and zip straps or wire. And we did a few of those too. It just depends on what your goal is and what you want to grow. Those are actually really good at creating shade. So when I did that method, I would grow lettuce underneath and vining crops of some kind. It would either be green beans or like a squash or cucumbers, and I would grow it over, and it would give my lettuce a little bit of shade. So there's arbors and arches. There's vertical plant towers. So these things get crazy fancy or are really, really simple. I mean, you can build them. I've seen multiple ways of how people build them. Again, using some kind of metal bar and different containers. I've also seen you can buy them. I mean, I've seen them at the Dollar Tree. So I have a couple from there. They actually lasted pretty decently. I bought them just to see how long they would last, and they lasted pretty decently. And then the garden towers, they have some really expensive garden towers too that are hydroponic, and they have lights with them, and they are on wheels, and you can push them inside and outside. Some of those things are like 5 feet tall. I have a friend that has one. He loves it. I cannot remember the name of it. So I'm not going to suggest a brand name because I don't have that, and I don't have anything that I've tested to see if I like it. In the future, it might be something I do just because I like having some herbs and lettuces in the winter. So it would be kind of nice to do that. And I think it might take up less space. And I like that it's on wheels. But we'll see. It's an option. And then I already talked about like the A-frames and the TP structures. I mean, you can use compost wood for that too. You can purchase them. The other thing that people use is wall-mounted structures. So I've seen people use something like pallets, and there's certain ways you can stuff that full of hay or straw or burlap to get it to hold the soil in. I've seen people use gutters. I've seen people use wool, like they use like these wool bags that you can nail to, fences and stuff like that. So there's many different options out there for growing vertically. Kind of the sky is the limit there. So some of the best fruits for growing vertically are tomatoes. When you do tomatoes this way, you don't have to, but one of the best options for that is making sure that you have an indeterminate tomato. So an indeterminate tomato will vine. A determinate tomato will not vine. It gets to a certain height and it stays there. An indeterminate tomato will grow. I mean, I have these little heirloom yellow pear tomatoes. I swear those things go like 10 feet, maybe even more if you give them the opportunity. It's crazy. They just go. So those actually work really well. Cucumbers do. I mean, you can get bush cucumbers, but most cucumbers by nature climb. So those are perfect for it too. And then when the fruit is ripe, it just kind of hangs down, which is kind of nice, makes it for easy picking. Pole beans work really well. I like to grow purple pole beans just because it's easy to see them and it's easy to pick. Plus those dark colors give you all those extra antioxidants and such. Another thing to grow is peas. So peas will trellis. You can use maybe one of your shorter trellises. You can make your trellis any size you want. Harold actually has a blog post, which I'm going to link to, where he shows you how to make a trellis with wood. So that's kind of fun. Zucchini and squash. So zucchini woodwork, I've seen where people are, they're not necessarily trellising them, but they're staking them and they're pulling those bottom leaves off. So I really want to try that. Mostly because I've had struggles with getting mildew and stuff on my zucchini, but squash definitely. So winter squash, some of your summer squashes, they vine a lot. Those are also really nice. They're a long season crop, so they're actually really nice if you want to create some shade because they're going to be there all summer long. Herbs, herbs you could grow vertically up trellises, but you can also grow those really well in like your tower structures. Some of the fruits that grow really well in those are strawberries. So we're thinking things with a smaller root system, especially these vertical towers or these wall hangings that people are using. Melons grow really well on trellises, either the arches or just a trellis. And you can trellis some of your blackberries. My blackberries get really, really long and leggy. So if you don't want them to tip over and replant themselves, which is how they plant themselves, you can trellis them just to hold them more upright, make it easier to pick, make it a little bit more organized. Another thing that you can do is people call them, people will trellis small fruit trees. They do this a lot over in Europe, but people are doing it here now too, where you can put it on a trellis. A lot of times you see these on a brick wall, if that will get your memory going as to what I'm speaking of. They train the tree specifically and they prune it specifically to do that, but it definitely gives you that outer edge. So you can do this along the edge of your property or on the edge of like probably a larger balcony. You're not going to be able to do this on a small balcony, but you can have a dwarf tree and do this and use the edges like we talk about in permaculture. And that's the other thing that growing vertically does, is it allows you to use all of your space and your edges of your property and still have some grass, which is what we wanted when we had kids and if you have pets. So the tips for success are making sure that when you do this, that you're giving the plants that need a lot of sunlight the right amount of sunlight, and the plants that need shade get shade. So it does take a little bit of planning, but it's not too hard to figure out. And the nice part about if you're doing some of this in buckets or towers, you can move things around. There's things like what are they called? They're called earth boxes. Yes. And I have had a couple of those. I've also had a couple of DIY type ones, and they work super, super well. I used to grow a ton of tomatoes in a 5-gallon bucket, a double stacked 5-gallon bucket, and with a hole drilled on the bottom of it. It did have soil, but it also had options to get lots of water, because when you grow in containers, they get thirsty. It's not because they drink more, but it's because there's less available for them to soak up from the soil around them. So they do dry out. Containers do dry out quicker. Watering. So we used timers and sprinklers. You're going to want to have access to water because growing vertically, they do dry out a little bit quicker. Usually it's because the soil is exposed. So if you have mulch in your garden or things growing interplanted, which I grow intensively, it definitely helps with the moisture issue. When your soil is exposed, it's going to dry out faster. So you're going to want to have some kind of either mulch or living mulch around. And if you don't want to do that, you're going to just have to make sure that it's getting regular watered. I use high quality soil. Of course, I'm working on rebuilding soil, actually building any soil right now. At this new place, we don't have much. We have built up a couple of places, which is where we're going to be planting things, out in our orchard and out in the nursery. But you want to make sure that you have quality soil so that your food is getting fed. Bagged soil, I don't even know what to recommend because there's been so many issues with buying bagged soil right now, just make sure that if you get it, that it's organic. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have issues. And the other thing is if you make your own, which I'm going to talk about this book, Mel Bartholomew's Square Foot Gardening. You make your own. Make sure that the compost you get is well composted so you don't get a lot of seeds and stuff in it, but also free of chemicals. There's been some issues with compost that people are having, and you just want to make sure that you get that down. And we've talked about soil and how to make that in some of our seed starting podcasts and stuff. Pruning. So you're going to want to prune these. I prune my tomatoes. Now, not everybody needs to prune. This is just an extra step if you want to take it. But I usually prune my bottom leaves off. At my old place, I had lots of problems with blight. And a lot of it was because I had such a small space. We do get humid here in the winter. I had to overhead water. I didn't have a choice in that. All of that can create moisture issues. And pruning just helps with that airflow. It removes some of the bottom leaves. It removes some of the unneeded leaves. And you can get a lot more airflow and avoid a lot of those issues. And of course, you're going to want to support things really well. So when you're using vines, you can either train the vines as they go and weave them. And if you don't do that, you're going to have to use some kind of something to get you, like say your melons and your cucumbers to stay up on their vertical growing apparatus, whatever it is you use. One of the things that I have found that works really well, and it stretches and it doesn't seem to cause harm to the fruit or the vine, is nylons, old nylons. And I actually, it sounds crazy, but for some reason up here, and maybe it's not like this down there, but when you go to the thrift store, there's always nylons at the thrift store, and they're not even used ones, like in the box still. I don't know if people just bought lots of them and never used them. And I think eventually that's going to run out because people don't use a lot of nylons anymore. They don't wear them very often. But anyways, that's what I use. I cut them and then I can use them to tie. People use all sorts of things. They make all sorts of things. And yeah, so that's what they do. Sorry, I'm shuffling my notes here. So let me see how far. We're only 18 minutes in. So good. I have time to talk about this. So we had a really, really small backyard. And I wanted to talk about using this in a small backyard and then possibly in a balcony. So I wanted to give a few examples. One of the things that you can do is use your perimeters. So that's your edges of your yard, the edges of like a deck or something like that. You want to use the edges. They're great for those tall trellises. You can use arched trellises in the center between those. And then you can use vertical spaces like the side of your garage, the side of a fence that's already existing, a wall that you already have. You can lean something up against your house if that's your desire as well, or your building. You can combine raised beds and trellises, which was what I did when I first started. I actually started with all of these boxes that we made out of pallets, and then we put raised trellises on them. And I'm going to show you real quick. So we used Mel's, so Mel Bartholomew, Square Foot Gardening. We used his method for the trellises, which was the metal conduit. And I'm telling you, it worked absolutely excellent. This was, we lived in that house for 18 years. So I had those trellises for probably 15 of those years, maybe even 16 of those years. It might even be longer. I mean, we've had a garden for the most time that we've lived there, except for maybe the first year. And they're still, you can't even tell. I mean, they've needed a little fixing here and there with screws tightened. So here is what, let me see. There we go. Here's what it can end up looking like. And that, of course, is up. That looks like it's up on a skyscraper. So it's a raised bed garden with a vertical. And that's exactly what we did. And we used the conduit. I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's conduit corners that you can buy to screw in. And that's how we did it. So we bent ours, and then we used this trellising, which you can get even in jute if you want to be 100% recyclable or compostable. You can use jute. I'm switching all of my things over to jute and burlap after seeing some things that Clay Bottom Farm did. They did a bunch of testing, and they found out that for row cover and for frost blankets, the burlap did just as well as row cover, and it's compostable. So I'm going to be switching over to that. I'm probably going to try some of these jute vertical growing netting and see how well that holds up. I don't expect it to hold up for more than a year, but we'll see. I have used jute before for my peas and stuff like that, and I'm fine with that. So anyways, back to a 1/4 acre backyard. So you can use the raised bed trellis combination, which is why I showed you that book, because it showed that, and you can do that anywhere. You don't even have to have soil. And then you can put like trees in the corners and stuff like that. And all this allows you to have some grass still if you want it. And if you don't, you can turn the whole thing into a big garden. And that's basically the reason I shared this book, is because it really is. It talks a lot about that. Everything is, he uses raised beds. Everything is trellised, growing vertically. It's how to grow a lot in a small space, which is kind of what basically this topic is. And I think it's an excellent book. Almost every library I've ever been in has it. I'm sure you can get used copies for really affordable. It's literally one of my favorite books. You can see when I started. Yeah. And it's actually so good that I found extra copies for my children and sent them that because they wanted them. So let's move on to the layout for a balcony. So with a balcony, you can use railing planters, and that's kind of growing vertically. You're up off the ground, and they have so many options for railing, for railing planters. I just bought some. They're supposed to be flower boxes that you're supposed to screw in your house, which you can, but you can also use them as railing, and they're self-watering and everything. And I got them at the end of the season last year, really affordably on clearance. So you can get these self-watering things already made, or you can create some of your own. There's a lot of DIY stuff out there. And again, you can do one of these vertical towers. So some of them use soil, some of them are hydroponic, but a lot of them can have wheels put on them. A lot of them can come inside or outside. And a lot of them are really, really tall. The one that a friend has is taller than me. It's probably 6 foot tall. It's really big. It's really big, and it holds a lot, but it's probably also really heavy. So, but it would work great on a balcony. You can use wall mounted pockets or shelves. Like, again, I've seen these made out of wool and felt. The sky's kind of the limit, and you can go online and get some ideas there. You can use a ladder frame and shelf. Those work really well. I was also thinking this is also a really good spot for earth boxes. So earth boxes are actually probably the soil comparison to the grow towers that are hydroponic. The earth box, they're up off the ground. They're raised beds, basically. They come with wheels. They're meant to be rolled around and moved around. Those come with trellises, or you can make trellises. There's also just stand-up benches that people make for growing gardens in, which are also vertical. And then you could grow underneath them lettuces and stuff like that for shade in a balcony. And then hanging baskets and hanging buckets. So I think we've all seen some of the hacks that people use 5-gallon buckets to grow tomatoes upside down. It works really well. You could use hanging baskets and hanging buckets on a balcony. So you could have this really nice little tiny garden on, say, a 4 by 8 foot balcony. You could grow quite a bit. So that was just kind of my run through of giving you some ideas on growing vertically. It really helps optimize space and the plant. But when you grow vertically and you're using small spaces, as Harold and I have talked about a few times, you're definitely going to want to make sure you're feeding that soil adequately, because anytime you put something in a pot or it has a small amount of soil, it also has access to less vitamins, minerals, and water. So definitely needs a little bit more babying, but you're growing in a small space. So all that time that you would have spent in a big garden, you're probably going to spend on a little garden, especially if you're growing intensively in a vertical space. So we talked about all of that, and I'm going to talk about, I already talked about the earth box and a tower. I talked about Mel's book, and then I talked about Harold's trellis building post that he has over on his blog, and I'm going to put those links in there for you so you can go and read that, because he walks steps by step through that. So just some ideas as we're getting ready to ramp up into gardening season. We don't plant here until the end of May outside, but nurseries are already growing our fruits and vegetables if we want them, or we are growing them ourselves. Now, I want to get to a lot of times, and this is kind of an add-on to the vertical, but don't let this discourage you, because maybe you are in the Carolinas right now and you think, oh, I'm late, I can't plant a garden. You can always plant a garden. We grow here from the end of May to the end of September, and that's it. So if I can grow something now and not plant till the end of May, then you can grow something where you're at. So it's not too late, no matter where you're at. If you wanted to grow something vertically, it's not too late to start it. You're just going to need, for like peppers and tomatoes and stuff like that, you're just going to need a bigger plant. You're not going to be able to start from seed probably now, but I don't know, maybe you could. I mean, it depends on how late your last frost is and the weather conditions where you're at. So be encouraged to start your little vertical garden. Try something this year, small. Put a trellis up somewhere. They're beautiful to look at, especially those arches. They're super fun and beautiful. Kids love them. And that's the other thing I didn't mention, is it could create a kid spot to hide and play, or even a pet spot to hide and play in the shade if you get pretty warm out. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hopefully Harold and I can find a time to get together and put together our next podcast. I believe we already know what it's going to be. And I will see you guys next time. Have a great day and grow where you're planted.